Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. Watch my video and subscribes my channel. Ridge Forrester's world turned upside down in a way he never imagined possible when a shocking revelation came crashing into his carefully constructed life, sending ripples through the very foundation of his relationships, his family, and his own sense of reality as the bold and the beautiful spoilers tease that Ridge is horrified to discover that Taylor Hayes, the woman he has shared decades of complicated history with, the mother of his beloved children Steffi and Thomas, the woman who once fought with every fiber of her being to hold onto his love against the powerful gravitational pull of Brooke Logan, is secretly in love with Bill Spencer, the very man Ridge has considered his greatest nemesis and rival for years, a man whose name alone conjures up memories of betrayal, blackmail, ruthless business wars, and emotional manipulation that scarred the Forrester family in more ways than one, leaving Ridge in a state of disbelief as he pieces together the timeline of events that led to this unholy connection, this forbidden romance blossoming under the radar while he was distracted by his own ongoing tug-of-war between Brooke and Taylor, believing he was the one who held the key to both their hearts when in truth Taylor's heart had started beating to a different rhythm, one that resonated with Bill's dark charisma, his commanding presence, and the kind of boldness that she had sworn off years ago but now seemed to crave again like a moth drawn to a dangerous flame. And as Ridge paces the Forrester mansion with the weight of this bombshell pressing down on his chest like a vice, memories flood his mind of every time he warned Taylor to stay away from Bill. Every time he told her that Bill would only bring chaos, destruction, and scandal into her life. And yet here they are, hand in hand, a secret couple that managed to keep their passion hidden behind closed doors while the Forrester, Spencer, and Logan families waged war on other fronts, oblivious to the fact that the most scandalous love affair was brewing right under their noses, a romance that threatens to rewrite the rules of loyalty, betray Ridge's trust in the most intimate way, and set off a chain reaction that could shatter not only his relationship with Taylor forever, but also his fragile truce with Bill, whose past actions include throwing Ridge out of a helicopter, sabotaging Forrester creations, and relentlessly pursuing Brooke. And now it appears that Bill has turned his attention to Taylor, not out of revenge, but, as Taylor tearfully admits, out of a genuine, unexpected, and all-consuming love that she can no longer deny. A love that grew in the shadows as they bonded over shared regrets, their mutual roles in protecting Steffi during her darkest hours, their united front against Sheila Carter's threats, and their whispered late-night conversations about redemption, second chances, and what it means to truly move forward after a lifetime of mistakes, leaving Ridge to question not only Taylor's choices, but also his own role in pushing her into Bill's arms by constantly keeping her as a backup plan while chasing his decades-long obsession with Brooke, stringing Taylor along with promises he rarely fulfilled, breaking her heart repeatedly, and creating the perfect emotional void for someone like Bill to step into with his unrelenting confidence, his promises of safety, his ability to make her feel seen and desired in a way Ridge perhaps hasn't in years. And as this twisted love triangle expands into a quadrangle involving Brooke, who is stunned yet quietly vindicated by this revelation, seeing it as proof that Ridge never truly owned Taylor's heart entirely. The rest of the family begins to take sides, with Steffi torn between protecting her mother's newfound happiness and respecting her father's deep anguish. Thomas quietly fuming that the man who once destroyed his family's legacy is now entangled with his mother, and even Hope Logan raising an eyebrow at how all roads with these families always lead back to Bill Spencer in some form or another, creating a storm of dinner table showdowns, office confrontations at Forrester Creations, and whispered strategy sessions about how to contain this before it destroys their already fragile alliances. Because if Ridge allows his rage to consume him, he may once again spiral into reckless decisions that impact the entire fashion house, while Taylor, vulnerable yet defiant, insists that this is not some fleeting infatuation, but something real, something she is willing to fight for even if it means risking her bond with her children, her professional reputation, and her long, complicated history with Ridge, who now must face the mirror and ask himself whether his horror stems purely from betrayal or from the realization that he no longer has the power he once wielded over the women in his life. That the triangle he believed he controlled has shifted permanently, and that perhaps Taylor. Choosing Bill is less about Bill winning and more about Ridge losing his grip on the illusion of control he built over decades of waffling between two loves, a sobering truth that forces him into unfamiliar territory, acceptance, humility, and maybe even revenge if his darker instincts are awakened. And as the bold and the beautiful spoilers hint at explosive confrontations ahead, with Ridge demanding answers, Bill refusing to back down, and Taylor daring Ridge to finally let her live her life without his judgment, viewers are left to wonder if this shocking twist is the final nail in the coffin of Tridge, or the beginning of a storyline that will see Ridge fight harder than ever to reclaim what he believes is his, even as Brooke watches from the sidelines, calculating whether this is the moment to reassert herself as Ridge's true destiny, while Bill, uncharacteristically vulnerable, yet still razor-sharp in his moves, plots a future with Taylor that could make him a permanent fixture in the Forrester family tree, for better or worse, ensuring that the coming weeks will be filled with tense hospital visits, corporate power plays, and raw, unfiltered emotion as one man's horror at discovering an unexpected love affair sets in motion a new chapter of betrayal, desire, and high-stakes passion in the never-ending saga of the Forresters, Spencers, and Logans. Ridge Forrester could feel his heartbeat echoing in his ears like the pounding of war drums as the revelation about Taylor and Bill's love continued to unravel in his mind. Each detail he unearthed over the following days cutting deeper than the last, because this was not just some fleeting flirtation, not some momentary weakness or lapse in judgment. It had layers, history, nights spent together in secret, shared plans whispered over the phone when no one else was listening, moments of intimacy that Taylor had deliberately hidden from him even as she stood across from him in the Forrester living room with her warm, concerned smile, talking about their children's future and their shared past as if she was still tethered to him emotionally, when in reality her heart had already started drifting toward the very man Ridge had spent years battling, a man who once plotted to steal Brooke from him, who held a gun over his family's head in the form of relentless business takeovers and blackmail schemes, who threw him from a helicopter and called it a business tactic. And now that same man had found his way into Taylor's life in the most intimate and irreversible of ways. And what tortured Ridge most was not just the betrayal, but the irony that Bill Spencer had become the man Taylor now trusted, confided in, leaned on, and perhaps even loved with the kind of intensity she once reserved only for Ridge. And as Ridge poured himself a stiff drink in the dimly lit study, memories of their long history flooded back. The births of Steffi and Thomas, the tearful reconciliations, the passionate reunions on foreign shores, the promises whispered after years of separation. And yet all those promises, all those declarations, now seemed like relics of a past that had finally expired, leaving him stranded in the present, clutching a glass of scotch while imagining Taylor wrapped in Bill's arms. Bill's rough, commanding voice telling her everything Ridge never managed to say at the right time. And in that tortured moment, Ridge's mind turned not only to Taylor, but to Brooke, the eternal counterpart in his never-ending love triangle. Because how could he face her now, knowing that while he was torn between two women for years, one of them had quietly made her own choice, a choice that excluded him entirely, and Brooke, ever the opportunist in matters of the heart, would see this as a victory, a vindication, a chance to remind him that she had always been the one who fought hardest for his love, that Taylor had now crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. And yet, even Brooke's potential gloating couldn't ease the weight in his chest, because what Ridge felt most acutely was the loss of agency, the realization that for the first time in decades he was not the one choosing between Brooke and Taylor. They were choosing without him, Taylor especially, by entwining herself with the one-man Ridge considered utterly off-limits, a line in the sand he never imagined she would cross. And as this revelation rippled out through the family, reactions came swiftly and without mercy. Steffi, torn between loyalty to her mother and her deep protective instinct toward her father, tried to broker a peace that seemed impossible, while Thomas reacted with cold, simmering fury, pacing the halls of Forrester Creations with his jaw clenched, muttering about Bill's manipulation, suspecting that his mother had been groomed into this romance at her weakest moment. While in truth Taylor, with quiet steel in her eyes, insisted to anyone who questioned her that this was not manipulation. This was connection born from shared trauma and hard-won growth, and that for the first time in years she felt like a woman, not a consolation prize, not a placeholder while Ridge waffled between two lives, but a person desired for exactly who she was, flaws and all, in Bill, standing at her side with that trademark Spencer swagger, tempered by a surprising gentleness, promised to protect her from the storm that was now brewing, declaring that he didn't care if the Forresters staged a war, if Ridge vowed revenge, if the Logans whispered in the shadows, because he had found something real with Taylor and he was tired of living for everyone else's approval. A declaration that sent Ridge's temper into overdrive when he confronted Bill face to face at Spencer Publications, the air crackling between them as Ridge slammed his hand on the desk and demanded to know how long this had been going on, if this was just another one of Bill's games, if he planned to use Taylor as leverage, to dangle her like a trophy every time Ridge crossed him in business or family matters, and Bill, unflinching, looked him dead in the eye and said, "No, this time it's not about you, Ridge, it's about her." A sentence that hit Ridge like a punch to the gut because it forced him to see something he'd long ignored. Taylor's agency, her right to choose a life outside of his, gravitational pull. And yet that realization didn't soothe the jealousy raging in his chest. It only stoked it. And as the days passed, Ridge's behavior grew increasingly erratic, oscillating between moments of icy silence and explosive outbursts that left Eric, Brooke, and even Steffi urging him to take a step back before he drove Taylor further away. Because the truth was, the more Ridge lashed out, the more Taylor withdrew into Bill's protective embrace, the more the world began to see them as a legitimate couple rather than a scandal, and soon whispers began spreading in the fashion world. Would Bill and Taylor make a public debut? Would they go to the next Forrester Gala together, turning it into a duel of smiles and biting words? What does this mean for Spencer Publications and Forrester Creations' delicate economic connections, which have already been strained by years of rivalry and occasional alliances? Could this forbidden relationship serve as the bridge that finally unites two dynasties, or will it spark a conflict as intense as Stephanie Forrester versus Brooke Logan, taking apart all Ridge had worked so hard to preserve? These were the questions swirling in the corridors of power as Ridge, sleepless and simmering, began plotting his next move, torn between the urge to fight for Taylor as he always had and the gnawing fear that this time he might already be too late, that Bill had offered her something Ridge never fully managed to give, uncomplicated devotion, fierce loyalty, and the willingness to choose her above all else without hesitation. And as Ridge stood alone one night in the Forrester mansion, staring at the portrait of his mother Stephanie and asking her ghost for guidance, the camera lingered on his clenched fist and haunted eyes, hinting that this was far from over, that the battle for Taylor's heart, for family honor, and for Ridge's own pride had only just begun, promising viewers a cascade of confrontations, shifting alliances, and emotional reckonings in the weeks ahead as the bold and the beautiful continues to prove that in Los Angeles, love is never simple, loyalty is never absolute, and the past is never as buried as you think. Ridge Forrester found himself haunted not just by the sight of Taylor Hayes standing beside Bill Spencer, but by the echo of her voice as she confessed that what they shared was not some fleeting distraction or revenge-fueled affair. It was something real, something she had chosen, and that word, chosen, cut through him like a blade because for decades he had been the chooser, the man who hovered between Brooke Logan's golden promises and Taylor's steady, forgiving love, weaving in and out of their lives with the confidence that both women would always remain in orbit, ready to catch him when one path faltered. But now that dynamic had been turned upside down, and as Ridge wandered the empty halls of Forrester Creations late at night, the silence pressing against his skull like a vice, He realized the true horror was not that Taylor had fallen for Bill, but that she had finally chosen to stop waiting for Ridge, that she had found someone willing to meet her where she was, broken, pieces and all, without demanding that she compete with the ghost of Brooke or the shadow of 1,000 old promises, and that someone was the very man Ridge despised most, a man whose name had been synonymous with betrayal ever since the helicopter incident, ever since the hostile takeovers, ever since the relentless pursuit of Brooke that turned their lives into a battlefield of public scandals and private wounds. And yet here Bill was, standing taller than ever, not as a villain, but as a protector, a man who had quietly been there for Taylor during Steffi's postpartum battles, during the war with Sheila Carter, during those fragile months when Taylor questioned her worth. And the more Ridge dug, the more he discovered that this wasn't a sudden spark. It was a slow burn, a connection nurtured over time, nurtured in the very spaces Ridge had vacated while chasing business deals, Europe trips, and his endless quest to rewrite the past with Brooke. And that knowledge filled him with something far darker than anger. It filled him with dread, because if Taylor could love Bill, then what else in Ridge's world was no longer certain? Could Steffi, his feisty and protective daughter, genuinely support her mother and openly defend their romance? Could Thomas, whose allegiance to Ridge had been so fiercely tested in the past, find common ground with Bill in order to keep Taylor happy? Could Brooke, who is always waiting in the wings, grab this opportunity to completely recapture Ridge, establishing herself as the only woman unaffected by the Spencer connection? These questions tormented him as days turned into sleepless nights, and meanwhile Bill, uncharacteristically softened by his new role as Taylor's partner, began appearing at family events with her, his arm casually draped around her waist, his once predatory smirk replaced by something that almost resembled genuine peace. A look that infuriated Ridge more than any taunt or insult ever could, because it suggested that Bill had achieved what Ridge never fully did. He made Taylor feel safe, wanted, prioritized, and while the world whispered about ulterior motives, about whether Bill was using Taylor as a pawn to rebuild bridges with Steffi and Finn, or to insulate himself from his past crimes, Taylor herself spoke with clarity. She was not a victim. She was not coerced. She was in love. And that love was giving her the courage to stand up to Ridge in ways she hadn't since their earliest breakups, confronting him in his office with a calm, measured voice that sliced deeper than any scream, telling him that his rage only proved how little he truly respected her autonomy, how much he saw her as an extension of his own ego rather than a woman capable of making choices that didn't revolve around him. And that quiet defiance sparked something volatile in Ridge. He began to consider strategies, not just emotional ones, but corporate, legal, even personal, because Ridge Forrester was not a man accustomed to losing ground. And if he could not win Taylor back, perhaps he could at least dismantle the scaffolding of her new happiness. But as he moved his pieces on that invisible chessboard, he found resistance at every turn. Steffi warning him not to alienate her mother, Eric cautioning him that a war with Bill could collapse crucial business deals, Brooke cautioning him that obsession would only drive both women further away, and even hope, ever the moral compass in the storm, gently suggesting that perhaps Taylor deserved the chance to love someone who didn't make her runner-up. And these voices, combined with his own reflection in the dark glass of his office window, forced Ridge to confront an uncomfortable truth. Maybe this wasn't about Taylor betraying him. Maybe this was about him failing to choose her when it mattered. And in that void Bill had stepped in, not as a conqueror, but as a constant presence, a man willing to do the one thing Ridge rarely did: stay. And yet, even as that truth simmered beneath his skin, the other part of him, the fiery part that had fought for every inch of the Forrester legacy, the part that once boarded helicopters and waged wars over love, refused to lie down quietly, and so the stage was set for a series of confrontations that promised to shake the very foundation of their world. Whispered meetings between Ridge and Brooke in candlelit restaurants where she urged him to take the high road. Tense dinners where Steffi's eyes darted between her parents as though she were 10 years old again, watching their marriage crumble. Heated confrontations at Spencer Publications, where Bill refused to let Ridge's insults pierce his newfound armor, and through it all Taylor remained steady, a woman transformed not by rebellion, but by a choice she finally made for herself, a choice that sent shockwaves through Los Angeles, but also, in some twisted way, liberated everyone else from the cycle they had been spinning in for decades.